What if I told you that your students' school records, search history, and even their emotional data was being collected, sold, and used to train AI models without your consent? And what if I told you that some of the free apps that teachers sign up for and use in the classroom are actually harvesting student data, only to be used as leverage to force schools and districts into paying to access their own students' information? And what if I told you that once your student's digital footprint is out there, it never disappears? It follows them for life, shaping their future opportunities and potentially exposing them to identity theft long before they even turn 18 years old. Well, it's not a conspiracy. It's happening now, and we're going to dive in and talk about it in this episode. Welcome to Safe and Innovative Schools, where we're exposing the risks in educational technology and what schools must do to protect student data. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest and most misunderstood threats in education: the digital footprints that our students are leaving behind, who owns them, and how they're being exploited. If you think a digital footprint is just what kids post online, think again. Let's get into it. So a digital footprint is the trail of data that students leave behind every time they interact with technology. For schools and districts, that footprint can include school-issued devices and internet usage, learning management systems, AI-powered learning tools, and the student data that's put into third-party systems that might be online, that might be some of the free teacher sign-up apps that are happening out there. When we're looking at the school-issued devices and internet usage, it's important to understand that every click, every search, and every login leaves behind a digital trail. And the learning management systems are tracking everything from assignments to student behavioral patterns. Those AI learning tools that are coming out and hitting the market are creating profiles of students that are tracking engagement, performance, and even the emotions of our students. And it's really important with these AI-powered tools to understand that the data that's being collected could also be used to train the AI model in the back end. And depending on the agreement or lack of agreement that a school or district might have with that AI-powered platform, that data could be going back to the investors of that EdTech tool who might also own other companies. And that data might be being used for the profit of those other companies as well. It's important to understand that our student data is incredibly valuable, and it can be used for monetization in ways that we would never think of as parents or as educational leaders. One of the other things that's really important to understand is that if schools and districts are not monitoring the use of and protecting their students' data, well, somebody else is. Somebody else is monitoring that data. Somebody else is using that data. And if we're not protecting it, we're allowing our students to become the product of that company. And along with that, it's really important to understand how these EdTech companies are holding student data hostage. Most districts and schools will assume that EdTech companies are respecting student data privacy, but that is far from the truth. The EdTech ransom model, as I call it, is how companies use student data to trap schools and districts into signing up for paid accounts and paid licensing. Here's how these EdTech companies operate. Teachers will go and sign up for a free account online for a tool that they think is going to help them do their job better and help them with the teaching and learning process. But part of that sign up is adding in student data and using the tool to collect even more student data. The EdTech company then stores this data regardless of if there's a data sharing agreement in place or a contract with the school or the actual district in place. And then later they contact the school or the district and let them know, hey, you have this many teachers that have signed up for a free account and they have put this much student data into our system. If you would like to access and protect the data, you need to buy a paid subscription or a paid license in order to protect that data. And I call that the EdTech ransom note when it comes in. And it comes in way more often than you would think. And some of these companies that say that they're compliant with student data privacy laws are only compliant once you sign up for that paid account and once you actually have that data sharing agreement in place. So it's really important to understand when teachers are going and signing up for these free accounts, they're not really free. They're putting the students' data in there, and then it is being leveraged to force districts into these paid accounts and the data is being used to make a profit on its own. And if the districts refuse to pay, student data is lost. The company still holds and retains that student data, and there's no real federal regulations requiring them to delete the data. The onus is on the school and the district to make sure that we are complying with those state and federal regulations. So let's talk about a case study. There was a Midwest district that discovered over 40 unapproved EdTech tools have been used by teachers, creating tens of thousands of unauthorized students' accounts. When the district refused to sign a paid contract, the company locked the students out of their work and continued to store their data. The district had no way to retrieve the data, even though they had never approved the tool to be used in the first place. This data extortion is something that many districts don't even realize is happening. And not only did they not give the student data back to the district, they used it in other platforms that were owned by that company. Again, if schools and districts don't control how student data is collected, stored, and used, the EdTech companies and their investors absolutely will. Here's what we need to do to make sure that we are storing, using, and protecting student data effectively. We need to have strong data sharing agreements. Many districts fail to require these strict data sharing agreements when adopting new technologies. This allows vendors to store and share student data indefinitely and share it however they want to. And some districts unknowingly sign contracts that let companies sell data right to their investors, or they don't have a contract in place at all that's prohibiting the EdTech companies from selling the data back to their investors. A lot of districts also fail to inform and enforce the FERPA and COPA protections. FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act that requires schools and districts to protect student data, but it's often ignored. And COPA is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and it's supposed to stop EdTech companies from collecting data on children under the age of 13, but some companies will bypass this by getting teachers' consent on behalf of the students. And most schools don't audit vendors for FERPA and COPA compliance at all. A lot of schools and districts don't even know to do this. So it's really important to learn about FERPA and COPA as a parent and as an educational leader and make sure that we're abiding by these federal laws. There are also state regulations in many states that have protections that either meet FERPA and COPA or go further than FERPA and COPA inside of that state. It's also important to really understand that EdTech companies share data with their investors who own other companies. Many EdTech companies share student data across multiple businesses owned by the same investors. Some of these investor groups are the big name groups that we hear of when we think about large corporate companies. These are the same investors that buy up these EdTech companies and use the data in order to create these profiles for these students. And that profile grows and expands with the student throughout the rest of their life. So as an example, an investor that owns an EdTech company could also own a DNA company, could also own a banking company, a loan company, and all of this is creating a digital footprint on your student throughout the rest of their life. So what if your student in the future goes to get a loan and the company trying to give them the loan has their social emotional data from 6th grade? It can have a big impact on the future of that student. If a district doesn't lock down student data, the EdTech companies will absolutely profit from it. They'll use it for AI modeling. They'll share it with other EdTech companies. They'll use it for advertising and predictive analysis. And they'll sell targeted products to schools and districts based on their own students' data. So what should schools and districts do to protect student data? Well, they must enforce district-wide data governance policies. Data governance sounds like a big word. It sounds a little bit scary, but really what data governance is making sure that the actions that we take with student data abides by federal and state law and school board policy. We want to make sure that those data policies ban unauthorized teacher signups for those free educational technology tools, that we require district or school approval on all third-party applications, and that all staff are trained on FERPA and COPA and why unauthorized apps create these cybersecurity risks for our students. We also want to require strict data sharing agreements before approving vendors. We want to make sure that we understand how the data is being used, how it is being stored, and how it is being protected. We also want to make sure that we're getting that data back or that data is being destroyed at the end of the contract with that company. No contract equals no access to our student data. And if an EdTech company refuses to sign a data sharing agreement, they cannot operate in the district. All data sharing agreements should require no third-party data sharing, no AI model training with student data, and a mandatory deletion of student data when those contracts end. And as parents, we can do some work to protect our students' data as well. Parents may assume that schools are protecting their students' data, but that's not always the case. Many districts and schools fail to enforce data sharing agreements. They also fail to monitor their EdTech vendors, leaving students vulnerable to this data exploitation. So here's what parents can do right now to ensure that their school and district is keeping their students' data safe. Demand transparency from the school and the district. Ask for a list of all approved EdTech vendors that your child interacts with. Most schools and districts should be publishing this on their website and making it readily available to parents. Request a copy of the district's data privacy policy or their data sharing agreements to see what protections are in place around your student data. Find out if your child's data is being shared with third parties. Many schools don't disclose this unless asked. If schools and districts cannot readily answer these questions, then that is a big red flag. Parents can also opt out of unnecessary data collection. FERPA gives parents the right to opt out of certain data sharing practices. So what you'll see with FERPA is something called directory information. And that's usually your student's name. It could even be their address and some other directory type information, what grade they're in, what teachers they have, and some other things like that, that the schools can just share without getting express parental consent. And so as parents, you can actually opt out of the district or school sharing that without your consent. It's also important to understand that many times schools and districts will make EdTech companies what's called school official under FERPA. School official allows the school or district to allow the EdTech company to become legally part of the school district, and they're doing work on behalf of the school district. Now, this isn't bad. This is just a way that schools and districts can make sure that the EdTech company is abiding by the data sharing agreement, and it allows the district or school to share student data with that EdTech company without having to go and get parental consent for each and every student for each and every app. That said, if you don't want your students' information shared with a particular company, you have the right to opt out of that as a parent. You can also ask the district if you can opt out of data collection for non-essential apps. Some EdTech vendors track students even when it's not required for learning. Most parents don't know that they can request student data access and deletion under FERPA. Use this power. Parents can also monitor their students' school accounts and devices. Check which apps your child is using, review those privacy settings on those school-issued devices, and disable unnecessary permissions. If an EdTech tool collects more data than you feel is necessary, ask your school or district why. What's the data being used for? Why is it relevant? Parents can also push for stronger district policies and accountability. Join the PTA, the local school board meetings, and raise concerns about student data privacy. Advocate for strong data sharing agreements. Parents can influence districts to ban vendors that don't comply with FERPA and COPA. Encourage the district to conduct annual EdTech audits. Schools should be reviewing their vendor contracts every year. Parents have more influence than they think. Demand better data policies and better data sharing agreements, and know your rights as parents under FERPA and COPA. A child's digital footprint is permanent. If schools and parents don't actively protect it, tech companies and hackers will own it. Districts must stop signing weak contracts that allow student data to be stored indefinitely, or worse, not having contracts in place at all. Schools must be transparent about how student data is being collected, used, and stored. Parents must demand accountability and take action to protect their students' online identity. What can you do next? Email your school or district and ask about what privacy policies they have in place around student data. Join the fight for the enforcement of FERPA and COPA laws. And share this episode with other parents, educators, and school leaders. Subscribe to Safe and Innovative Schools for more insights on how to protect student data in the digital age. Until next time, let's keep working together to make our schools safer and more innovative. Thank you.